Last week we got to hear mercy of Christ. Today we hear it again, another story. As we listen to the story of the woman caught in adultery, where do you find yourself? What do you find going on in here as you hear it? Anything? Or is it just so many words again? What kind of intellectual questions might you have had rise as you listen to it? I think all of us can learn something a great deal today. We hear a woman caught in adultery, but did you notice? Where's the guy? Where's the man at? So in the very act, that means there must have been somebody else there. Now, if there were, and apparently she was guilty because the gospel begins with the fact that she was, and Jesus himself says, then I don't condemn you either. So apparently that's not the question. The question becomes, what is taking place here? I would think that in some way, this woman is being more used by the guys bringing her before Jesus than she was by the guy that was with her. Why do I say that? Because, probably in most countries, in most places, there's all kinds of laws on books. And truth be known, each one of us could probably be arrested for something and taken to the jail. That's what Bishop Sheen said when he gave a talk at prison. He said, the only difference between you and I, he says, you got caught. We are all guilty. That's why there's laws, I think, so it gives discretion to those who enact them to be able to tag almost anybody at any given time. And so we look at this gospel and say, well, what was the law? Well, the law, obviously, is if you're caught in adultery, you can be killed. But then we also look at reality as they overlook constantly that law being broken. I mean, prostitution was not unheard of at all. And some would say Mary Magdalene was probably a prostitute. But whatever, it's most likely this woman was a prostitute, therefore was already being abused and used by society. But, they didn't bother until they had another use for her. And when they had a use for her, and that use was what? To try to catch Jesus, who was another innocent person, whom we'll see next week, who has led to his death. And so we see her being used in order to crucify Christ. What is the law here? And what is the penalty? We can learn from it because it has to do with capital punishment, and it also has to do with mob psychology, if you will. But most likely, there's only two people who had decided, okay, now's the time, let's get her, we'll use her today to crucify Christ. And in that process, they start the procession to Christ, and as they're going, they're saying, come, hey, we're going to stone this woman. Oh, right, you get crowds. Why do we, as human beings, seem to have such a fascination with the death of others? Ever since Cain killed Abel. We are very prone to mob psychology, to following a group, especially when it means somebody else is going to pay a price. We can look at witch hunts, if you will, in the early centuries of this country. We can look at the hangings that went on in Mexico. By the way, the last of the Cisneros apparently died this past week. We say, what's happening there? People went to these crucifixions, to these hangings, because there's some sort of excitement. And truth be known, why do some people go to many sporting events that are very violent? So, did you see what I saw? It might be a 2-hour event, but there's one thing that stands out, and that's when someone gets killed or seriously injured. And that's why. We find the adrenaline rush, if you will, because someone else is paying the price. So we look at after World War II, when someone started reflecting back on the persecution of the Jews, and they said, well, when they came for the Jews, I didn't do anything because I was not a Jew. And then they came for the doctors and the leaders. I didn't do anything because I wasn't one of them. And then they came for me, and there was no one to defend me. As long as it's someone else paying the price, we can seem to relish in it. So first of all, today we have to look at ourselves and say, where is our heart in terms of seeing others pay such a tremendous price? Capital punishment, should there be at all? And we'll read shortly a statement from the Pope that he gave this week. And the other is, then, as a country, as a people, what kind of people are we? Are we able to defend our people, our loved ones, without necessarily seeking the persecution, the death of others? And are we a people who want to keep an eye on laws that can happen? For example, we talk about the Cicero movement in Mexico, which is 1917. Masons managed to get a law on the books back in the late 1890s concerning foreigners who might lead groups. In other words, address or take charge of groups. Well, that didn't sound too bad, so the law passed. But then in 1917, that same law was used to condemn foreign-born priests. And so we saw a tremendous persecution of the church taking place. And immediately, so many people bought into that and followed it. And thank God for those willing to pay the price to go against it. So, capital punishment. This woman today is being accused of something heinous enough that she deserves capital punishment. Does she? And is it just? Again, where is the guy involved? If we are biased in terms of how we apply those laws, then obviously it's not just. And so when you look at our own system here, is it just? If I were to present a scenario to you, and you were going to be a lawman, and you saw 4 people speeding down the highway, all of them breaking the law, and one of them was a real, beautiful, young, attractive woman, and the next one is, an old man, but he's not going too fast over the speed limit, and the next one is a black who also has an out-of-state license plate. Which one are you most likely to pull over? I got to witness that one time when a policeman went around me and I was speeding and pulled over the guy in front of me, and I've been following him for a long time. Said, well, he's certainly not really broken any laws, but he got pulled over and found out why, because he was Hispanic, I think. But whatever we say, are we just in being consistent in the application of laws? Male, female, black, white, whatever. If we're not, then the law itself has to be seen as unjust. Today, let's think about that, and let's think about our own participation as a democratic country and saying, how do I use the gifts that God has given me to be an influence to bring about a greater justice and a greater reverence for all of life. This past week, the Pope was addressing the International Association on Penal Law, and he called for the abolition of the death penalty as well as the abolition of life imprisonment. He denounced what he called penal populism, the world's prescribed cure for crime and punishment. By the way, the United States apparently has more people in prison than per capita than any other country. You say, what's happening here? It is impossible, he says, to imagine that states today cannot make use of another means than capital punishment to defend people's lives from unjust aggressors. The Pope just made this comment last week, and so he said, all Christians and people of goodwill are thus called today to struggle not only for abolition of the death penalty, whether it be legal or illegal in all its forms, but also to improve prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of persons deprived of their liberty. And this I connect with life imprisonment. Life imprisonment is a hidden death penalty. The Vatican recently eliminated this life imprisonment from its own penal code. And according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the traditional teaching of the Church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. And such thing might apply to, say, the Indians when they lived in teepees, and there absolutely is no way of controlling or holding somebody. They may find that they have to eliminate someone to protect the whole tribe. And so the Pope noted that modern advances in protecting society from dangerous criminals means that cases in which the execution of the offender is an absolute necessity are very rare, if not practically non-existent. While a number of countries have formally abolished capital punishment, the death penalty illegally and to varying extent is applied all over the planet because, and this is rather crucial, extrajudicial executions are often disguised as clashes with offenders or presented as the undesired consequences of a reasonable, necessary, and proportionate use of force by the law. In other words, we make an instant judgment right now, I'm going to wipe you out, and I have been the judge and the jury in the process. So the Pope denounced then the detention of prisoners without trial. He says this accounts for more than 50% of all incarcerated people in some countries. Maximum security prisons can be a form of torture since their principal characteristic is none other than external isolation, which can lead to psychic, physical sufferings such as paranoia and anxiety, depression, weight loss, and increase the chance of suicide. The Pope also rebuked unspecified governments involved in kidnapping people for illegal transportation to detention centers in which torture is practiced. Criminal penalties should not apply to children, he said, and should be waived or limited for the elderly who, on the basis of their very errors, can offer lessons to the rest of society. We don't learn only from the virtues of saints, but we also learn from the failings and errors of sinners. So today, as we listen about the woman who is caught committing a sin, committing and breaking the law, we need to think of all our use of force in terms of exterminating other people, whether it's just capital punishment or even in terms of war itself. How do we justly or unjustly take the lives of others when, for example, we time and again say, well, we lost 10 troops today, but then we don't mention how many men, women, children who are non-combatants are taken out and say, and there was collateral damage done. People are not collateral. People are human beings. Every single life must be respected and cared for to the greatest extent possible. Today, let's again look at our own attitude towards the death of others, our attitude towards ourselves, and our attitude towards local laws, and our attitude towards the country. How do we, as a country, become the kind of leaders that we want to be proud of?